Todd Howard has finally broken his silence on Fallout 76. For the uninitiated, right now it is Pax East in Boston. Bethesda is doing their own little event here, doing a bunch of live streams, dubbing it Bethesda Game Days. Earlier today, we saw Todd Howard on two separate panels, one being about Fallout 76, among with several other people, many of those who are working on Fallout 76, a lot of the lead devs and community people. But then after that, we actually saw a second panel that was around the 25th anniversary of the Elder Scrolls. And through these two panels, we actually got a lot of interesting information. On my first watch of it, I was like, oh, they don't really talk about that much. It is definitely a more casual panel. A lot of times they're just discussing certain things about their games or things they liked or history of them. But upon rewatching this to actually take notes on it, you realize they say a lot of stuff that is really interesting. They reveal a few things about Fallout 76 DLC that actually wasn't confirmed thus far, as well as just other future plans that may be a little bit more far out. We get a look at the Elder Scrolls 6 and kind of Starfield in the most removed way possible, as well as they share details about what's going to be coming at this E3. But then also just in general, we hear from Todd Howard about Fallout 76. This is kind of a big deal because following the release of the game, I don't think Todd Howard has done a single interview or really public speaking in general. I tried searching around for that and couldn't find anything. There are a lot of interviews between E3 and the eventual release of this game, but I hadn't seen anything between the release of the game and now, which is when a lot of that backlash was getting pretty heated. So firstly, let's actually look at Todd Howard on Fallout 76. As I mentioned before, this panel was very casual. They were just kind of discussing Fallout 76, almost like they were all just friends having a friendly chat. Although Todd Howard does acknowledge some of the difficulties the game had. He describes it as interesting, and a lot of people on the panel agree with that. Through several of their public messages, Bethesda has definitely recognized that Fallout 76 has issues. I don't think they're trying to ignore that. They also mentioned how Fallout 76 was new for Bethesda Game Studios. They hadn't really done anything like that before, and they expected a lot of bumps along the way. Some of these bumps ended up being a lot harder than they anticipated. I assume that's in reference to some of those other controversies, not just the bugginess of the game. But even further, something I don't think we've really heard before, they actually mentioned how there was a lot of difficulties during the development cycle of this game.
We had a lot of difficulties during development, and sometimes those difficulties do show up on the screen. You never want them to.
They don't expand on this too much. They just kind of say that, yeah, they had a lot of problems internally as they were making the game, but I found that to be pretty interesting because it seems like that was kind of shown by the state the game released in, or even that press build we saw all the way back at the Greenbrier. You don't want your press build to have this much lag. It's just not a good look. And even further, of course, at the release of this game and during the beta, there were a lot of freaking bugs. I don't think that was the goal. They probably wanted to have less than that. So I personally found this pretty interesting because even though they were having internal difficulties, and they obviously became external difficulties as the game got publicized, they didn't do what a lot of other studios probably would have with delaying the game. It makes me curious as to whether or not maybe there was some interference by their parent company of ZeniMax. Although as one final note around that, Todd Howard also says the game did very well, and he cites how there are millions of players. That's a figure we've seen thrown around before by Bethesda. I do wonder if that's PR talk or something more. We've seen certain data that shows that Fallout 76 was in the top 20 best-selling games of 2018. Even though a lot of people expected this game to be a flop when they saw a lot of the negative press, maybe it wasn't. Maybe Bethesda is totally satisfied with how it performed, and assuming Todd Howard is being genuine when he says this,
we're really excited that the game actually did very, very well. We have a huge, millions of players, great player base in this game, giving us tons of feedback.
That really indicates to me that they are happy with how it performed, although I think they are disappointed with the state by which it released in. Although that was pretty much everything Todd Howard talks about in kind of reference to Fallout 76 and its launch. Even though he doesn't say a lot, I think what he does say is very interesting, but then they also do expand on this, talking about the future of this game. And I think Todd Howard has an issue where he's not always as tight-lipped as he should be, so several times he'll make comments that are actually kind of revealing, more revealing than a lot of the other people on the panel. They go on to talk about the future DLC of this game. They mention how there actually are several surprises on the way, so even though we got that roadmap that shared quite a few details, it seems like there's more than that didn't give us everything, and we actually find out one of those things that it didn't give us in this interview, as we do get confirmation that high-level dungeons are coming with this new questline. It seems like this is going to be on the questline that's just a week or two away now on April 9th, and the confirmation of this was actually pretty interesting, almost like it might have been somewhat accidental. They talk about high-level dungeons as if it had already been confirmed for the first DLC wave, that of Wild Appalachia.
And some of the things that we had shared for Wild Appalachia was around the high-level dungeons that we have coming. Farrah, do you have more information, or Chris?
But I looked around and I couldn't find anywhere where they actually confirmed that. We knew we were getting new quests, among other things, but high-level dungeons seem to have been revealed during this presentation. We heard about them for future DLC waves, such as Nuclear Winter, but not for this present one, and definitely not coming in just 2 weeks' time. Well, either way, the high-level dungeon they talk about here is going to be at Arcos Pharma. We see footage of this during the recent trailer for Fallout 76. We can see a ton of players taking on a ton of enemies. They describe this dungeon, again, as being high-level focused, and you're definitely going to want to do it with a group of friends. But they also reference other things, like it having lore as well as jump scares, with one person on the panel referencing this as one of the most visually appealing dungeons that has ever been made, but it is genuinely difficult to complete this one. They talk about the legendary vendor. This is another thing we know is on the way. Todd Howard starts talking about this, and he mentions a few interesting things, how it's going to operate on a token system, and that you're going to be able to roll for a legendary with some customization. That's literally everything he says. It's not like a totally coherent example of how this will work, but my understanding is you'll probably turn in existing legendaries, get a certain amount of tokens based on the legendary level, so how many stars it does have, and then you could re-roll those tokens for a new legendary. This is how I expected this system to work. The interesting part though is how he mentions that customization. Perhaps you could customize the system so there's some kind of bias and it'll give you a higher likelihood of receiving a certain kind of legendary, like maybe a PvP focused one versus a PvE focused one. That's pure speculation. I don't know what he meant by customizability, but I am pretty interested to find out. It definitely seems like this won't be totally random, or at least not as random as I previously thought. They also talk about certain content that is seemingly very far out. It's like things they want to add to the game that aren't presently there, but maybe will come in the future. They say they recognize the success of the recent Fosnot Parade event, and it's something they will absolutely be doing again. Seasonally timed events that get a lot of players interested and have that real community aspect you saw with the most recent one. They talk about how the traditional events in the game didn't get the reception or activity they were hoping for, but they definitely recognize they did something good with this most recent timed one. So it definitely seems like we will be seeing more limited time seasonal events in the future. They discuss the recently released survival mode, and they actually give some rationale as to why they allowed existing characters on there. They say how it's just easier. The mode is presently in beta, they wanted to get it out, but also it allows people to better break the game. Everybody on their high level character has a lot more opportunity to abuse things, and then Bethesda can fix them. Although one really interesting thing they mention, or specifically Todd Howard mentions, is the potential for survival seasons and how that's something they've been thinking about. He describes these as basically they will change the rules up for 1 month. In order to get into this season, you'll have to create a totally new character. But in the example he was giving, it seemed like after that 1 month, that might be the end, and then you couldn't use that character anymore, or maybe that character would be reverted to adventure mode. So the way I pictured this is, let's say there's one season where they actually have it so when you die, you drop everything. In order to get into that, you have to create a totally new character, and they'll experiment with seasons like this every couple of months, but they'll only exist for a limited time, so if there's less popular ones, you probably won't see them again. This was during that same section where they were just talking about kind of hypothetical future content, and I wouldn't take that as being confirmed, although to me it really did seem like they recognized the community outcry around allowing existing characters into survival mode, so I wouldn't be shocked if we see some changes or additional options around that in the future. They talk about one day potentially making it so camps are more fully integrated into servers. So right now, you can only see 24 camps on a server because there can only be 24 players online at a given time. But one of the devs mentioned how it's on his wish list to have that not be the case. That maybe even after a player logs off, their camp will still exist, so as people explore, they'll find more camps than just the online players. This is all very hypothetical. It doesn't seem like they're presently implementing this. It's just one of the ideas they do have. That same developer mentions he wants to add mods. It's something he'd love to see for this game, but they really don't say anything substantial around that. One interesting point they make in regards to community feedback, it seems like one of the main websites or sources they look at for that is Reddit. I imagine they're specifically talking about the Fallout 76 subreddit, and the way they talked about this, it seemed like they really meant that this subreddit was the main source. And although they do look at other things like their own forums, that this seemingly is the main place they look. And in regard to current game issues, they do recognize there's presently an endgame problem. They mention how right now they're trying to tackle some of the stability concerns once you get to the endgame and you see some of those larger battles or groups of people, but even further, just getting more content to that. Although we also see Todd Howard talking a bit about the Wastelanders DLC. This is the third major wave of DLC coming to Fallout 76 coming this fall. The way it's been described before and on the roadmap is the biggest and most ambitious, but also adding in choice. And based off the name and the visuals, Wastelanders, it sounds like they're going to add in human NPCs, potentially with dialogue choices. I'm speculating that at this year's E3, we actually see a trailer or big reveal around this. Basically, Bethesda listening to fan feedback and finally adding human NPCs and dialogue choices into this game. That would be a big deal, and it'd probably get a lot of people interested in it again. Todd Howard doesn't say a ton around this, but he reemphasizes that this is going to be a huge update with a new main questline, and the point that I think reinforces what I said previously, he also says this will change the game dramatically. He remained very vague on that one, but I think just based off how vague they've been with some of these new features, this is a reason to watch E3. I think they're keeping tight-lipped around the DLC because they have big plans for this E3, and hopefully we'll see that on full display in just around 2-3 months now. Outside of that, we also got some interesting stuff during the Elder Scrolls panel. First and foremost, we get that first look at the Elder Scrolls 6.
We're building the technology now that is going to fuel our future games.
We're using photogrammetry to scan in all these real-world assets and push our future tech for games to levels we have not done before.
With the encouragement of the fans, we're even immortalizing Skyrim Grandma using that technology.
This means a lot to me because I would be extremely happy to know that somebody else was playing with my character in a future Elder Scrolls game.
They did confirm they are adding Shirley Curry into the Elder Scrolls 6, and we get some clips as well as a preview of the face scan data for that. So this is really interesting because later on, Bethesda confirms this is one of those systems that we will see first used in Starfield and then later used in the Elder Scrolls 6. They mention how this is one of the new technologies they are bringing with their up-and-coming games. And if you're not familiar, there recently was a petition to get Shirley Curry immortalized in the Elder Scrolls. She's another YouTuber that does do playthroughs of the Elder Scrolls, the notable feature being she's quite a bit older than your average gamer. And if you are looking for a very genuine and heartfelt channel, I will have hers linked down below. But in more tragic news, they actually talk about how neither the Elder Scrolls 6 nor Starfield will be shown at this E3. And this was said by Todd Howard himself.
Before everyone asks, please be patient. It's going to be a long time. It's not something we're going to be talking about at E3, either of those games this year. And so patience.
There were some people holding out hope that we see Starfield releasing later this year. This pretty much disconfirms that at all, unless Todd Howard is lying here. I would say overall, expecting it now in 2020 is the much safer bet. But even beyond that, we actually get an interesting comment by Todd Howard on remasters. At this past E3, people asked Todd Howard about remasters, especially following rumors of a Fallout 3 remaster leading up to E3. At E3, he said that he didn't like remasters because he liked the charm that the age of those games brought. And for that reason, I think me and a lot of other people concluded that, alright, there's probably no remasters on the way. Although during this panel, he gives a bit of a different answer. He says that same thing, that the age is part of the charm, kind of reiterating his previous point, but even beyond that, he actually expands on it, saying that maybe if one of the old games was modernized with a remaster, it actually could be kind of cool. I'm definitely reading too deeply into that. I just found the change in his response to that question to be pretty interesting, and it gets me a bit more hopeful that we see a remaster of some kind for either a Fallout or Elder Scrolls game. Although considering we just saw the 25th anniversary of the Elder Scrolls and the 10th anniversary of Fallout 3. It seems like both of those milestones would have been pretty big opportunities, so I don't really know if that was to come, when it would release. And all in all, that pretty much wrapped it up, at least for today. There are a few more live streams going on during the Bethesda Game Days, but they're not actually from Bethesda Game Studios, which Todd Howard works for. They're going to be around Rage 2 and the Elder Scrolls Online, which are made by different companies, although they're all under the same parent company of ZeniMax or Bethesda Softworks. But if we do find out anything new either today or tomorrow, I will keep you guys updated. Either way, as always, again, I thank you all for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, but with that, I hope to see you all next time. Later.